All right, I am live here finally. That was wild. It happens sometimes. Things just stop working and you just go, okay, whatever. So welcome to another live stream. This is Wednesday night and it's been, I haven't set out a specific, schedule to release on Wednesday nights. Just tends to work out best for me. Now, I know it's a little frustrating because some of you have your Wednesday night church services, and so I don't want to impede with that, but if you're interested, you can always jump on after, because I think usually we go for about 2 hours, but hope all is well with everybody. Just a couple shout outs here. We've got Get Gnomed. How's it going? Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak, Mr. Moreno in there with TR leaves out words. It does, doesn't it? just playing. But I know exactly what you're talking about, and we will talk about that variant because it's really interesting what's happening here in Acts 15:34. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at Acts 15:34, and the question is, did Silas remain in Antioch, or did he go back to Jerusalem after the Jerusalem Council ordeal? So we're going to have to dive into a little bit of context here because what I have found, and I typically, how's it going, Wesley? Get Gnomes, Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak, James Snap. Typically, I don't like to deal with the internal evidence. I'm not a big guy on internal evidence. But this one, you're kind of forced to deal with that. And so we're going to talk a little bit more on internal criteria than we normally do. So let's get in here and we'll read our passage. Yes, Get Gnomed, I did shave. You weren't here on the live stream yesterday, if you haven't noticed. So who here watched the debate between Mark and Dan Hafley, Mark Ward and Dan Hafley? I did about an hour-long live stream yesterday just to kind of summarize how I think the debate went, and very clearly Mark steamrolled Dan Hafley, and I don't think it's mostly because maybe Dan is wrong or anything. I just think that Dan wasn't prepared. Now, of course, I think Mark would probably win anyway, but Dan Hafley didn't really put up much resistance, and so that kind of led to a rather interesting debate. Anyway, but we're not here for the debate. So I'm going to flip over my screen here, excuse me, to show you the passage we are going to be looking at. So this is it here in the New King James Version. However, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. And we have a little footnote here in the NKJV that says the Nestle Island and the majority text omit verse 34. So this verse is one of those places where the majority text, the Byzantine text, the F-35 text, the Hodges Farstad text, which is the majority text, all agree with the critical text. So because this is not a Byzantine reading, I'm more inclined to not think that this is original. However, we're going to take a look at the evidence so that you can see why my thinking is this way. And James Snap is in the comments here, but he happens to think that a variant of this would be original. We'll talk about that because there's a lot going on here. So let's get into the context here really quickly. What we need to understand is what's happening here. So this is Acts 15. This is the infamous, Jerusalem Council. And you've got a whole bunch of Gentile believers coming to the Lord in Antioch. And the Jewish believers, right? Remember, the church just started off as a Jewish church. They don't know what to do with all these Gentile guys. And so there's a number of people coming in saying, you Gentiles, you got to get circumcised and deal with that. There's some thought that perhaps Galatians was written as a response to what's happening here. Of course, like everything that's debated. But nonetheless, the church in Antioch has to figure out how to deal with all these Gentile believers that are coming into the church. So the guys in Jerusalem say, okay, we're going to talk about this. We came up with a solution. I believe it's in verse 22. Well, I guess here's the problem. Since we have heard that some who went out from us have troubled you with words, unsettling your souls, saying, you must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such commandment. Of course, that's going to unsettle your soul if they're telling you to be circumcised, right, men? You know exactly what they're talking about. That would be unsettling. Anyway, after all is said and done, they kind of come to the conclusion here, for it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that you abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well. So that's the command that's being sent back to Antioch. Now that letter, okay, this is really a letter, is being sent by the hand of Paul, Barnabas, Silas, and Judas. Okay, Judas Barsabbas, not Judas that betrayed Jesus. And so they take this letter to Antioch and they read it out to those in the church at Antioch. And once they're done reading and once they're done meeting with the church at Antioch, ooh, my table just fell. There we go. So once they're done with the church at Antioch, done sharing the message that came from the apostles in Jerusalem, there's a question now, and it's this. Where did those four individuals go? What happened to Paul, Silas, Judas, and Paul and Barnabas? What happened to those four? So if you come down here, we'll say verse 31. When they had read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. Now Judas and Silas themselves, being prophets, also exhorted and strengthened the brethren with many words. Now my Pentecostal pastoral heart here goes, look, prophets. But nonetheless, anyway, past that. And then in verse 33, it says, and after they had stayed there for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. Now there's a little variant here. It would be worth diving into this variant. I didn't do that this time around just because there's I mean, if I were to just stop for every variant, but it says those who had sent them versus, actually that's interesting. Those who had sent them. I wonder if that's obtuse there. If obtuse is there. Alpha, epsilon, tav, omicron, epsilon, sigma. Because that would actually matter. That would make a difference because there would be a greater potential for parablepsis here if that was the case to those who had sent them. Which may be a vulgate. That's interesting. But anyway, leaving that aside, then we come to here where it says, okay, after they had stayed there for a time, they were sent back. Okay, this is referring to the four apostles. They were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. However, and then it stops here, it seemed good to Silas to remain there, assuming there is Antioch. And then in Acts 15:35, it says, Paul and Barnabas also remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord with many others. So to understand what's happening here is, remember, 4 people were sent with the letter from Jerusalem to Antioch. That was Paul, Silas, Barnabas, and Judas. Out of the 4, 3 of them remained there and Judas went back. So out of the 4, the 3 remained and the 1 went back. And so you read that and you look at that, it's a very roundabout way of saying that 3 remained and 1 went back. From an internal perspective, and like I said, we're going to focus a little more on we'll take a look at the external evidence, but to focus a little more on the internal evidence here because it's very interesting. Because what happens here is you have a bit of a pull and a push here. If you go to verse 33, okay, we just kind of skipped by it really quickly. It says, and after they, okay, this is a plural, there's no question about its plurality, they had stayed there for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles, or they were sent back with peace, as the King James Version has it. That's the formal translation. With greetings is a more dynamic translation here in the New King James Version, which is interesting. But they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. So I know I quickly said that it was the 4 of them, but this is actually, I think, referring to these 2, especially with our marker here. Now Judas and Silas, introducing the new subjects, Judas and Silas. So this they is referring to both Judas and Silas. And when you read this, you get the impression that Judas and Silas went back to Jerusalem. Okay, so that's all good. But then you have this verse, however, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. But weren't they sent back, right? As in the verse beforehand. But there's another kind of interesting contextual consideration. So if you come down here to verse 40, it says, But Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. So remember, what's happening here is Paul and Barnabas remained up here in verse 35. They remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord with many others also. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. So Paul and Barnabas are there in Antioch. They decided to remain. And then it came upon them after a period of time that they would say, well, you know what? Let's go visit all of our Christian brothers and sisters everywhere in the land. So they start, determining what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. Are we going to bring John Mark, or are we going to bring Mark, or Silas, or who? And there was a big, dissension over Paul taking Mark. I guess Paul and Mark just, didn't get along very well, and so he opted to take Silas. And so when he opted to take Silas, the question is, how is Silas there in Antioch with Paul? Right, so this is the other kind of contextual consideration, this internal consideration, is this. I thought it said that that Silas went back. Now, if verse 34 is not present, then we have to answer the question, well, how was Silas in Antioch for Paul to take him? If the verse is in there, then we have to ask the question, well, weren't they sent back with greetings? Didn't they go back to Jerusalem? So my position here, I'll just tell you up front where I think this is going before we dive into the evidence. So I think what's happening here is that this verse 34, was likely put there later to try to explain what's going on in verse 40. And now I'm not the only one who thinks that. I typically don't like to go to these internal considerations, but I don't have any other way to explain this. I think it's much, I would not want to suggest from verse 33, that they went back to the apostles and yet somehow having Silas stay. Someone likely thought it was better to put this there and to deal with verse 40. So there's an interesting conundrum going on here that we have to take a look at it. Now, this isn't the reason why I think that's the case, okay? I'm not going to leave that to my own judgment. I'm scared to do that. But the reason why I think this is it comes back to those presuppositions we talked about. If you are a Textus Receptus person, right, you're going to retain this passage because it's in the Textus Receptus. If you are a critical text person, oldest is best, right, you're probably going to take this out as well. However, if you're a Byzantine text person, the Byzantine text, the Byzantine manuscripts, for the most part, do not contain this verse. I think it's just a little less than 30% of our Byzantine manuscripts don't have the verse. The remainder, the 70+%, do contain it. Don't contain it. So the Byzantine reading, from what it seems on the outside, appears to be that this is not part of the Byzantine text. So it would likely be better to relegate this passage to the footnotes. So that's my position so far. All right. Things may change, I might, things may happen. But that's what I think it is. Now, why? Now, before we go into that, let's take a look at the comments and see what y'all are saying. All right. OBS just crashed. Yes, that was me. OBS can be a chump sometimes. Yes, it can. Wesley Grau, greetings. How's it going? Yes, get gnomed. I shaved. We touched on that a little earlier. You were in Buffalo. Very good. There's an English sentence made up of just the word buffalo. Buffalo, 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 buffalo. Yeah, serious, true story. Go wiki that. James Snap says, Mark Ward nuked the arena when he said he thinks it's a sin to give a child a KJV, but I digress. Yeah, that was an L. That was a big L on his part for sure. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freed. My first Bible was a Nelson KJV large print end of verse reference Bible given to me by my dad in 1987. I have those who had sent them, which may be a vulgatism. Yeah, so coming back to the passage. Why do you say that's a vulgatism? Vulgate has to those who sent them. Not only that, but interestingly enough, what's going on here? The stream. What's going on here? Just taking a look. I'm getting a warning. Something's going on with my stream here. Did I lose everybody? Sorry, guys. 1 second here. Okay. I'm just getting a warning that there's something wrong with my stream. Just give me 1 second. Okay. I think we're good. Okay. Yeah. So coming back to what you're saying here with the Vulgate, I'm curious as to its inclusion there, because the sources that I looked at say the Vulgate doesn't contain it. So there's the Vulgate as listed in Wayne Mitchell's text, and then I went online to the Vulgate text that's available there, and they all say that it's omitted. So what are you looking at that has that as included? I'd be really curious to see that. All right, we're all still here. Good. Okay, let me pop my notes up here. So that's kind of the contextual problems that we have with the verse. Adding the verse gives us a problem with the verse before it. Removing the verse gives us an apparent problem with verse 40. So we'll talk a little bit more about that contextual stuff in just a moment. But before we do that, let's do what we normally do. Let's take a look at some of the other versions and see what their notes say. So the ESV doesn't have verse 34, gives us a footnote here. And it says, but it seemed good to Silas to remain there. That's pretty standard. Again, NASB 95. I'm going to guess that it will retain that, which it does, but in square brackets. So again, that's the committee in the 95 saying, we don't think this is particularly scripture, so we're just going to put square brackets around it. But most people who are going to read are going to ignore the square brackets. The note we have is early manuscripts do not contain this verse. And I mean, this is generally right. There are 2 early manuscripts, depending on how you define early manuscript. Okay, if you're talking 6th century and below, then there are 2. There are 2 that I know of. And those 2 are actually, I would say they're fairly problematic, but I think, James, you would disagree with me with that. The NIV, I believe this is the 2011 edition, again, puts the verse in square brackets. I still think that's funny. D has some manuscripts include here, but Silas decided to remain there. The New Living Translation will also have skip the verse, and we have a little footnote. Some manuscripts add verse 34, but Silas decided to stay there. The CSB, we'll get to the NASB note, or the NET note in just a second. But the CSB has 2 notes there. What notes are there? Oh, this is interesting. Okay, I didn't catch this. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so in the NLT, they went with the second reading in verse 33. So remember that they were sent back in peace by the brothers and by the brothers. Okay, I don't particularly like brothers and sisters here, but nonetheless, by the brothers and sisters to those who had sent them, now, the typical reading we have here is to the apostles, and undoubtedly it's referring to the apostles in Jerusalem. So that's probably what footnote A is. Yeah. Other manuscripts read the brothers to the apostles. This is interesting. Okay. This is really funny. This is an inconsistency in the NLT. So they have translated brothers and sisters, assuming Adelphi. That's the word that they translated there. But then in the footnote, they don't translate Adelphi as brothers and sisters, just brothers. Pick one or the other. Okay, I know it's a footnote, but still pick one or the other. Either or. Again, this is important, I think. And I didn't dive into this variant a whole lot other than to just kind of be aware that it's there. But because of the form of avtos that this is, could potentially refer back to Parablepsis. All right, and then our footnote for our passage here in verse 34 says, but Silas decided to stay there. Okay, easy peasy. Last one here, the NET will have these notes here. Now, just keep in mind that the book of Acts is, aside from Revelation, probably the most difficult textual book, textual variants and such in the whole New Testament. Okay, you got Revelation, which is basically on its own as far as like textual transmission and stuff, and then there's the book of Acts, and then essentially the rest of the New Testament. So for whatever reason, the book of Acts has a little bit more of a bumpy transmissional ride, but nonetheless. So the NET note, let's see here, where is it? Oh, that's Acts 8. How did Acts 8 get in there? That was from our last discussion. 15. I'll just do 33. There, after they had spent some time there, they were sent off in peace by the brothers to those who had sent them. So they opted for to those who had sent them. Interesting. And then we have our footnote here. It says, but Silas decided to stay there. Verse 34 is lacking in P74, Aleph, A, B, E, C, majority, Bahairic. It is included in a shorter form with a few minor variations by C, 33, 36, a couple manuscripts there, and in a longer form, but Silas decided to stay with them, and only Judas departed by D and I. D and L? I think that's, or maybe that's I. I think that's I. The verse is almost certainly not part of the original text of Acts, but was added to harmonize with the statement about Silas in verse 40. The present translation follows NA in omitting the verse number procedure, also followed by a number of other modern translations. So this is drawing attention to one of the other variants. So I would say there's 4 main variants for verse 34. And we'll take a look at that a little bit later here. But you can see that he's drawing attention to the longer form, which includes the phrase, and Judas only departed, and only Judas went back. So we're talking about that. So when you include that verse, you have a reference to all 4 individuals from verse 34 and 35. So again, it just seems odd to list Silas as remaining, and then Paul and Barnabas as remaining, and then to list them all out rather than just to say Judas departed. It reads weirdly, and I know that's exceptionally subjective. I understand that it's exceptionally subjective, but it just reads weirdly. There's some other translational considerations we'll take a look at too. All right. Whoa, who are you and what did you do with Dwayne? How's it going, Jay? He's somewhere. All right, okay, I'll just give the beard story real quick. Okay, we were riding home one day. If we need to go anywhere, we live out in the sticks. It's an hour drive in town and an hour back. Hey, how's it going, KW PC Tech? It's an hour drive there, an hour drive back. On the way back, I was like, I gotta cut my hair because my hair was getting pretty long. And so it's, my hair does this really weird thing where it goes out like this. And so I have to cut it. That's like my sign. When I see that, I cut. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna cut my hair. My wife turns to me and says, you know what? You should shave your beard. I was like, you know what? Maybe I will. So I came home and I cut my hair and I shaved my beard. And it was almost like instant regret. But it's coming back. It's coming back a lot quicker than I initially thought. So there was no real rhyme or reason. Just I change it up. All right. So where were we here? Paul and Barnabas were teaching and proclaiming along with many others the word of the Lord. Right. We're talking about Paul and Barnabas and the kind of weirdness of the way that these 2 verses reference them either returning or staying. Yeah. And anyway, so let's come over. Thumbnail promised a beard. How could you slip into such deception? It wasn't. Oh, I guess I'm going to have to take another picture, aren't I? A beardless me. I'm scared, though, that people won't take me as seriously without a beard. All right, let's take a quick look at the comments, and then we'll come back. Try to keep on top of things. All right, Stuttgart doesn't have it. The Clementine does. Okay. I have a PDF of Michael Tweedale's edition, which is based on the Clementine. Most of the time when I reference the Vulcan. Okay, I gotcha. Knox footnote, some of the Latin manuscripts following the Greek omit either the whole of the verse or the second half of it. Yes. NRSV footnotes, other ancient authorities add 1534, but it seemed good to Silas to remain there. Yeah, see, the thing is, I don't like that note, because that's not really what other ancient authorities mean. Like what the term ancient authorities is not good, because the reality is there is nothing aside from Codex D and Codex W before the 7th century that has the verse. There's nothing, just Codex D and Ephraemi Rescriptus. And so if they're referring to ancient authorities as Codex D and Ephraemi Rescriptus, well, Codex D has the addition about Judas going back on his own. And then Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus actually has the plural form instead of the singular form of avtos there. So when it says that it seemed good for him to remain there, Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus says it was good for him to remain with them. Okay, so assuming that with them, and it's a strange with them too, because it's not a dative case. Now there are textual variants here that have a dative case there, a plural dative, but in this instance, it's just a plural of a plural genitive. So is it plural genitive? I'd have to check again. Maybe it was plural accusative. I think it was plural accusative. Yeah. So. Anyway, it's really interesting what's happening there. All right, let me pop over my notes here. I'm losing my place. I'm just like, there's so much here. There we go. All right, let me give you the counts of what we have. Yeah. So when we talk about manuscripts which contain this verse and manuscripts which don't, we have about 489 manuscripts that contain this passage. And I don't mean contain Acts 15:34, but I mean contain this part of Acts that would or wouldn't contain this passage. So of the 489 of them, 150 manuscripts contain it. And this is about 30%. And of the 150 that contain it, 88 manuscripts have the consensus reading for it. And that reading would be the same reading as we have in the TR. So the Textus Receptus is reflecting 88 manuscripts out of 489. So of those 88 manuscripts, there's 6 more manuscripts which contain this reading, but have removed a particle from the sentence. So they are essentially the same. That's the particle de. They are essentially the same, but not exact. So you could go and say, well, there's 94 manuscripts that contain this passage along with the Textus Receptus. So that's the TR reading, which goes along with the minority reading. You could call it a Byzantine minority. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Part of why I would say it should go in the in the margins. Now, of those 150 that contain it, there's 34 manuscripts that have a variant there. So instead of saying it seemed good for Silas to remain there, avtos, it says it remained good for Silas to remain there, but they use a different word for there, avtothi instead of avtos. So there's 34 manuscripts that do that. Now, there's a remainder of manuscripts, I would say about 15 or so. I didn't quite do the math, maybe 15, 16, 17, around there, which have a number of various different ways of putting this verse together. Sometimes the name Silas has an article in front of it, and sometimes that article is inconsistent. For one example would be the name Silas has the article to in front of it, which is really strange because that's actually a neuter article. Sometimes you have the dative case. Mostly you have the dative case there. There's an instance where you have the accusative case there, which again is very strange. Sometimes you don't have an article at all. So this is amongst those 17 or 18 manuscripts that have really strange readings. Again, the other reading that is almost singular is that one that we were just talking about. And this comes from Codex Beza. So what I'm going to do here, let me pop over to my screen, is I'm going to show you Codex Beza. Codex Beza. And if you look at Textwund Textwort, that's my attempt at German, there is only one manuscript listed for the textual variant, which contains the bit about Judas departing on his own. And that's this one right here. So if I can see if I can zoom in. So where we're looking here is here. So it's edoxe, they, to, Celia. And this is interesting because he's spelling Celia in a very interesting way. It's usually sigma, iota, lambda, alpha, sigma for Silas. But here it's just a very strange sigma, epsilon, iota, lambda, epsilon, alpha, Celia. And then it's epimanin, so remained with them. So pros avtus. Now you'll notice, see if I can zip in here. A later scribe came along and added the word pros right there in Codex Beza. And so this is where we see the whole idea. See, this changes it to being something that's toward individuals as opposed to being in a specific place. So in this case, because this is plural of tous, right? What it does is it makes it more explicit that this is referring to the apostles, that it's referring to Paul and Silas. So the plural form here changes the statement. Instead of him remaining there or in that place, which we see almost everywhere later on when we have the verse, this specific variant refers back to the individuals. And specifically, I don't think there's any other way to interpret this other than to suggest that it's referring to Paul and Barnabas, that Silas remained with them, pros avtus, with them. So this is Codex D. Now, the reason why this is interesting, or why I don't take this too seriously, I think, James, if you're in the chat there, I'd be curious as to your thought here. I'm like looking through the comments really quickly here. But Codex D is, objectively speaking, a terrible manuscript. Okay, objectively speaking, if you go to the INTF site, you can get access. You just sign up. You can sign up for an account and you can get access to ECM, and you can see all the percentages of how a manuscript relates to other manuscripts based on, I'm assuming, collation data and all that kind of stuff. And normally you'll see like this manuscript relates to this one 95% of the way, or 80, 85, or maybe I don't know, pick one. But then there's a long and Peter Gurry mentioned this in my discussion with it. There's a long or a big delta between the worst manuscript and then Codex D, right? So it may end somewhere around, being 78%, but then Codex D is like 60%. Codex D is just not a good manuscript. It is known for this kind of inclusion. It is known for exceptional expansions like this. And the fact that you have the story of Judas, the fact that you have this extra clause about Judas going on his own back up to Jerusalem, and then having pros attached to that, right? This pros, by the way, that's it's only found in Codex D. Its original reading is there in Codex D. So yeah, lots of problems with Codex D, but nonetheless, it's an interesting variant. There is one other place where we potentially see this reading about Judas, and I can show it here in Manuscript P127, I believe it is. Now, I wasn't able to verify this, but the letters, I think it was like somewhere over here, was supposed to be the letters which would typically represent the reading about Judas. But if you go into the INTF site and take a look at the transcription of it, they have little dots under each letter. And what those little dots mean is we think it's this letter, but we can't be certain. And those dots are under every single letter. So to me, what it seems to be, and again, I just physically can't see that. I don't have, like, you can't see it. I think they'd be here if it was, but you just can't validate that. So this would be the other potential place where this bit about Judas is. And this is a 5th century manuscript. So you got 5th century Codex D, 5th century P127, and then you don't see it at all ever, except apparently in the Vulgate. So that's interesting. Okay, I'm going to pop over to the comments really quickly here. Oh, wrong screen. There we go. All right. So Jesus Freak says, Confraternity version translated from the Vulgate has the verse without a note, but it's bracketed. Yes. Brackets, most assuredly not being original, signify that the editors stopped thinking at this point or simply couldn't make up their minds. It could be. James Snap, brackets for disputed verses are tradition going back to the Tyndale-Coverdale era. I think this is a place where and sisters would actually be outright wrong. Yeah, actually, I think you're right. That's funny. Tyndale bracketed the comma Ioannium. That too. I wish someone would reprint the Great Bible with all its bracketed Vulgate readings placed into the otherwise Erasmus's base translation. Yeah, interesting. See, I often speak about Latin intrusions into the Textus Receptus, but I'm not entirely convinced that this is a Latin intrusion. I don't know where it came from. So it's interesting. Whoa, who are you? And what did you do with Dwayne? Yes, we went there. All right. Good evening, all. KWPC Tech, how's it going? The thumbnail promised a beard. How could you slip into such deception? Sorry about that. Yep, the full-on Dilbert hair stand. I get it too. Betimes. Yes. Go with the Amish look this time. That's funny. All right. Hi, James. Ancient authorities. We talked about that. Hey, Dwayne. Good evening. How's it going, GD? Hope things are going well with you. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak. A translation I have that purports to be based on Bizet. Has a different reading than I did. Judas journeyed alone. It's pretty much the same thing. Excuse me. Versus my Judas departed to Jerusalem alone. Yeah. James Snap. Hi, Snap. Hello, GG. James Snap, have you upgraded your PC mic setup or gotten any sound deadening panels for the office? I noticed on some debates, e.g. with Will Kenny, it might go a long way for hearers. Yes, James, we need to get you a microphone, like a decent one. All right. Okay. All right. Let me pop back into the notes here. Where am I going with this? So Codex Bizet, that's Codex D, just a very strange manuscript with some really weird things. Again, like I was saying, Silas's name is spelt really strangely. It's the only place it's spelled like that. It adds the word pros, oftus, to that with them, and then it adds in the statement that Judas went up alone. The pros was a correction that was added later, which is very, very strange, especially considering that I don't think anyone really considers that second portion, at least, to be part of Scripture. Very few places even put it in footnotes. P127 potentially includes that addition. And that's piece of. Now the other kind of honorable mention, right? We had 150 manuscripts which contain some sort of variation of this verse. The other one was Ephremi Rescriptus. Okay, now Ephremi Rescriptus is really interesting. I'll pull it up, but I couldn't find the verse. I found it on the INTF site, but again, I'm not sure that I can share publicly the stuff from the INTF site. I know it's public. Like the manuscript has public images, but I don't know what the legalities are surrounding using that. So I would rather not lose the channel for making that kind of choice to show something that perhaps I shouldn't. But I can come here to, oh wow, there's a bunch of like not cataloged stuff. That's interesting. GA04, I think it is. Yes. So just to kind of show you at least what the manuscripts look like, what the manuscript looks like. This is somewhere in Acts. I'm pretty sure this is somewhere in Acts. You can see the Greek writing, like the main stuff. It's in minuscule script, and then behind it you can see some writing in behind that in a sort of darker, in a sort of like lighter blue color. In this instance, it looks like the page is like upside down and backwards. But there are some pages where it's not upside down and backwards, and you can see the Greek text in behind that. It's going to take way too much effort and time to find the specific page. But so I'm just going to rely on the work of others in this instance. And so what they have is edoxendeto, sila, epimene. So it's basically the same form that we see today, with the exception of, instead of being, it seemed good for Silas to remain there, it seemed good for Silas to remain with them. So again, the focus is not on the place in Ephraemi Rescriptus, but the focus is on the people, presumably Paul and Barnabas. So you have a reference there. Now, there's two other manuscripts which share this exact same reading. One is GA 296. That's a minuscule manuscript, but it's exceptionally late, very late. In fact, it is proposed that this manuscript, GA 296, was copied from a printed edition, like the Textus Receptus or something like that. The other manuscript which contains this plural form of avtos is 2401, and it's listed as a corrector, and it's a 12th century manuscript, but I went and looked at it. Again, it's only available on INTF, and I did not see the plural form there. I've seen avtu, but I didn't see avtos. Now, it could just be that I'm not as great with minuscule manuscripts, and there might actually be a sigma there that I'm just not seeing, but I did not see it there. So again, this represents a reading which is contained, the avtus, with Codex Bizet, right? But remember, Bizet has the additional stuff, and then the two very, very, very late manuscripts. So again, it's interesting. It's a little honorable mention, but those are the two earliest representations of this verse that we have. So 05 and 04. It's not in any other unsealed manuscript. It's not in Alexandrinus. It's not in C. It's not in Pi. It's not in Aleph and B. It's not in any of those. It's not there. In fact, the only time we really begin to see it in the manuscript tradition is when we start looking toward the minuscules. And even then, it's only in a minority of them. So we next move on to our versional stuff. So that's great. We're going to take a look at the versions real quick here. Where am I on here? Oh, good. Yeah, so taking a look at the versional stuff, this is what we're seeing for this. We have a few old Latin manuscripts, AR, GIG, Gigantus. That's a very interesting manuscript. They got this like big picture of a devil right on the front. It's so weird why you would do that. Anyway, manuscript L, manuscript RO, and manuscript W. These are old Latin manuscripts that contain the reading. But here's the thing about these manuscripts. There is not one that is earlier than the 7th century. In fact, there's only one that is 7th century, and we have a 9th century, a 13th century, a 14th, or a 15th century. So that's Old Latin. There's no early support in the Old Latin tradition. The Syriac, yes, Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible, that's right. The Herclean edition contains it, but the Herclean edition was done in the 7th century. So again, we're looking at nothing before that 7th century mark. There are apparently a number of Coptic Sahidic manuscripts and one Bohairic manuscript, which contains, a number of Bohairic manuscripts which contain it, and one Sahidic manuscript that contains it. So again, I took a look to see if I could find specific individual Coptic manuscripts that contain it. I couldn't find any, but the general gist of what I had as far as Coptic, Sahidic, and Bohairic manuscripts are concerned is we generally don't have any that are before the 10th century. I mean, I'm sure there are, but the question is, what do we have of Acts? And I don't think it's very much. Then we have Armenian, Ethiopic, Georgian, and the Slavic editions, which are generally later. So when we talk about omissions, now versions which omit it. We have a number of Latin manuscripts, Old Latin again, that don't contain it. I didn't catch what DEM was. It was a 13th century manuscript. E was a 6th century manuscript, and P was a 12th century manuscript. So again, doesn't seem like there's much support in the Latin tradition for its old, but then again, there may not be very many manuscripts there. So, hey Nick, how's it going? Good to see you. I have listed here for its omission the Vulgate. The Clementine edition, we were talking about that earlier, does not contain this passage. Was it the Clementine that doesn't contain it, or the rest of them? For the most part, I think the Vulgate doesn't. The Syriac Peshitta does not contain this passage, and then there is some, I think it's one, I think the way the notation works, it's one Bahairic manuscript, which doesn't contain the passage. So we go to the Church Fathers where this gets interesting. Again, with the Church Fathers, there are no Church Fathers that quote this passage. Nothing. Zero. And I know, argument from silence, I understand that. So you turn to Chrysostom in his 33rd homily, I believe it is. He references Acts 15, and he goes all the way up to verse 33 in his commentary, and then says nothing else. You can go there and read it, and you can tell that he's tracing down where these individuals are going, where Paul and Silas is and Barnabas and how they get there. But then at verse 33, he stops and moves on to the next paragraph. So would he have quoted, or would he have referenced Silas staying there? Potentially. But again, maybe not. Maybe not. But either way, that does leave us with a very big hole in church history as far as this verse is concerned. None of the church fathers reference it. Zero. Nothing. So this is in line with our Byzantine tradition. So that's a quick outline of the evidence for its inclusion/exclusion. So what rides on this verse? We'll pop over to the comments here, see what y'all are saying. All right. So we got, I'm going to have to find a better way to flip back and forth between stuff here. All right. So friendly neighbor Jesus freak, I literally just bought a $10 mic because people were complaining about the sound from my webcam. Yeah, so your microphones on your laptop and your microphones attached to your webcams are just going to be junk. That's the way they are. So yeah, even if you spend like $30 on something, it'll be a lot better than your stuff. Mr. Moreno, you're a Bizet onlyist? You're a Bizet onlyist? Yes, LOL Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. Yeah, I don't understand that. I don't get it. I don't get it. Why would you draw a big devil on the front of your Bible? You could imagine doing that today. And if I were to open up a Bible with a big devil on the front of it, I'm sure many of my congregants would probably have something to say about that. Greetings from Silver Spring, Maryland. How's it going, Ross Lewichuk? How are things over there? Nick, we said hello earlier. Hello, Nick Sayers. Get Gnomed enjoys your content. I enjoy your content as well. And then Jesus Freak says, Clementine has it, Stuttgart doesn't. There we go. Stuttgart doesn't. All right. So Acts 15:34. I want to go back here and share the potential, right, of parablepsis happening here. So this is actually mentioned in Wayne Mitchell's Greek New Testament 4th edition, a very interesting volume. If you have a chance to get one, I hope he's printing them and selling them because it is very helpful. I found it to be exceptionally helpful for these kinds of discussions. But if we pop over here, I'm going to show you a little bit of Greek. I know this might be all Greek to you. I've highlighted this phrase here. Okay, remember, there was a textual variant in the verse before. So verse 33. He was there for a little bit of time, and they were sent away with peace from the brothers to go back to the apostles. And remember, the variant reading here wasn't just apostles, prostus apostolus, but the other reading was they were sent back, or they were released. I guess that works. They were released to go back to those who sent them. And again, them would be the accusative plural version of avtos, so avtus. So that would be this word here, but with a sigma on the end of it. Now this is our verse here. Edoxen de tosila epimene avtu. This is our verse that it seemed good to Silas to remain there. But if you take the variant reading that we have in Codex D and Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, we have a sigma on the end of this. And so what happens is if you have a sigma on the end of this, you also have a similar ending here. And what you get is you get Parablepsis. The scribe is copying this down, copying, comes to the end of the passage, looks away, okay, perhaps at the manuscript that he's reading, that he's copying from. And when he returns his eyes, he comes to the ending here, which, Codex D has that variant with the sigma on the end. They look the same, and so they skip past all of this and continue copying in here. So the question is could this be an error of Parablepsis? It's possible. It's possible. Now, the only issue that I have with this, and I think this is where James Snap and I would probably disagree here, is to have two manuscripts where this is possible makes this not very likely. It's hard to believe that if Parablepsis happened here, homotheieton, whatever you want to call it, right? If that happened here, then why would we only have two manuscripts with the sigma ending? I just don't see that. I think in the case of Wayne Mitchell in his 4th edition Greek New Testament suggests that even though the sigma is not there, perhaps just the u is enough. Or perhaps the idea of having the alternate reading there, avtus instead of apostolus at the end of verse 33, might signify something that's more similar to this, and he just kind of skips past the sigma. It seems a bit of a stretch for me, but again, that's how it goes. So when we come back ultimately to the question of this verse, we look at verse 33, and after they, the plural, had stayed there for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. They are clearly Silas and Judas. So they were sent back. They were sent back with greetings. It wouldn't say they were sent back with greetings if they didn't go, if one of them didn't go. There's a plural here for sure. Now, the other interesting thing that happens here is there's a funny translation thing that happens, and I think it's because of the inclusion of verse 34. It's Nick. This is where we depart from where we agree. So what happens is in the New King James Version, they put the word also in there. Okay. Now, if we go back to Greek, keep in mind that the NKJV is translating from the Textus Receptus, and it's no different here. But you have Paulos de ke Barnabas, okay? That's Apollos and Barnabas, or Barnabas and also, what was that again? Paul and Barnabas also. Paul and Barnabas also remained with them. The King James Version, I think, says Paul also and Barnabas remained with them. Now, the problem here is there is a natural adversative effect when you don't have verse 34 here, because it's only natural that it's going to change its view from the text speaking of Paul and Silas and Judas being sent away, to an adversative effect. Well, they went away, but Paul and Barnabas remained. And it makes perfect sense. In fact, most of the time, they is translated but, but gives us that adversative idea. But because verse 34 is in there, the New King James Version and the King James Version tends to translate the day there as also. And it's awkward. It's very awkward. So in this instance, with this verse not being here, it fixes that. Not only does it fix that, it fixes the plural form of the verse before it. When you have avti, prophytentos dialogu poli periskatuse delphus ke epistexen, and verse 33, meterinis apoton e delphon, right? Pros tus apostolus. Where is it? Oh, it's embedded in the verbs. So it deals better with those verbs. Now, if you add the verse, it's problematic for that. Although it seems to fix verse 40. But Paul chose Silas and departed, being commanded by the brethren. Because remember, well, how did Silas get there? Didn't he go to Jerusalem? So to answer that question, we just simply go to verse 36, where it says, "Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, 'Let us now go back and visit our brethren.'" The idea here is after some days, a certain amount of days. It doesn't give us an exact number of days. The general gist of this bit here is to suggest that a bit of time had passed, and it's more than likely enough time had passed for Silas to make a trip to Jerusalem only to come back to Antioch to meet up with Paul. So I think that's just a better way to answer that question. But again, these are some of the contextual considerations here. I wouldn't use them specifically to make the decision here. What makes the decision here for me is the fact that the Byzantine text form essentially, right, 30% have the verse, and then the remaining 70% don't. So it's a Byzantine consensus that contains the verse. So that's pretty much it. It's 5:15. This was kind of a shorter one. But I guess that that makes sense. I had a live stream yesterday. I hope you all enjoyed the live stream yesterday. Let's see what's going on here in the comments. Great Bible not withstanding, it pleased Silas to abide there. Yes, that's because it's a TR based translation. Of course, the TR is using that sort of consensus of those 88 or so manuscripts that contain the verse. Mr. Moreno, Wycliffe, but it was signed to Silas to dwell there. And Judas went alone to Jerusalem. Interesting. Well, that makes sense because Wycliffe is translating from the Latin Vulgate. Ross Lewichuk, Pickering's translation omits it. Yes, it does. With an explanatory note, Boyd's translation puts it in the notes. Yes, because Boyd's translation is based off the Byzantine text form. We love the Lord Jesus. Amen. This variant doesn't really affect anything, to be honest. No. When compared to Matthew 17 or Acts 8:30. That's right. What does this impact? One could suggest that it impacts an idea of preservation. But that's as far as it goes. I don't know of anyone that has preached a sermon on Barnabas. Where is it here? On Barnabas staying there. However, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. I don't think I've ever heard anyone preach on that. I would be hard pressed to determine any doctrines that are really impacted by this. I mean, you got to be careful with that, though, right? The reason why you got to be careful with that is because you can't just go to passages and say, well, this doesn't matter and that doesn't matter and this doesn't matter. The Holy Spirit inspires it and puts it in the body of the text, right? Then that's scripture. And regardless of how seemingly unimportant it is, it was important enough for the Holy Spirit to inspire and put it in the Bible. So the question we have here is verse 15:34, part of the Bible. I mean, it's not in the Byzantine manuscripts. It's in very few, relatively few. Hit the like button, y'all. Good info we're getting for free. That's right. Thank you. Hit the like button. People, this will help the algorithm. That's what they say, right? The algorithm gets sent out when you hit the like button. Thumbs up everywhere. All right. Yeah. So yeah, what is this truly impacting? The only thing that I could think of that it would impact is potentially a view of preservation that requires it to be there. That's about it. I don't see it really impacting how I would come to this verse, aside from maybe in a backhand comment in a sermon somewhere saying, Silas and Paul went out, and we don't really know whether he stayed there or whether he went to Jerusalem and made his way back. Because the reality is the book of Acts isn't really concerned too much with the ministry of Silas. It more documents the ministry of Paul and the ministry of Peter. There's a few other people in there, but Silas isn't really a central figure. He does come up later in the epistles and such, but even still, again, who's preaching on verse 1534? I'd be curious to see if anyone's preaching if anyone's preaching that. The Orthodox cut it out in order to downgrade Silas, of course. That's funny. All right. Just got on the bus home. Still online. Oh, nice. Get gnomed. LOL, what an awesome username. Yeah, it is. O'Leary Theory, idolatry breaker. Yes. All right. That's pretty much all I have on Acts 15:34. Again, I'm generally very uncomfortable with approaching some of these things from a more internal position. So I have to, right, as a Byzantine priorist, remain objective, and this is the what do you call it? The upside of being Byzantine priorist is I can look to the Byzantine manuscripts, which we have a tremendous amount of them that go long before the Textus Receptus, and say, look, most of them, the consensus among Byzantine manuscripts is that this verse isn't here. And we can count them and provide an objective number and say, well, this is why. I don't have to worry about diving into the context to see what's going on here. Now, we dove into the context here because it supports what the objective numbers are. But I recognize that not everybody's going to take the same interpretation that I am as the passages that we're talking about. I'm a bit reluctant to go to internal evidence like that. But I think given here, the problems that arise when you have the verse and the potential problems you have when you don't have the verse makes it a very interesting case study in some of the internal criteria on some of these variants. So this one specifically I found to be rather interesting, tracking down Paul and Barnabas and Silas and Judas. It appears as though it appears as though Judas and Silas went back to Jerusalem after they were finished delivering the message, while Paul and Barnabas stayed behind. I mean, there would almost be no reason to say Paul and Barnabas stayed behind if it was just Judas leaving. And it's interesting that that the writer, if that was the case, that Silas did in fact remain there, that more ink would be spilled saying that Silas stayed and then Paul and Barnabas stayed, and then we would just have to kind of infer that Judas left from the verses preceding it. That's another difficulty. And then when you look at the other textual variants, right, the other textual variants seem to attest to that, the fact that Judas isn't mentioned leaving. We see that in Codex D and Codex E with that extra long little bit in there saying, well, and Judas went alone, like explicitly telling us that Judas went alone. But again, just to kind of summarize even that, right, is Codex D is known for those kinds of expansions. So I don't know what the history is with the Vulgate with that, because the Vulgate itself is a very messy thing. Nobody's really, I just don't know where to go with the Vulgate. It's very, anyway. Mr. Moreno says, you're violating the most important part of textual criticism. The Byzantine text is always wrong. Not so. Maybe in times past, but not today. James Snap says, get GNOME. Some Peshitta copies have it, but not all. Murdoch's English Peshitta has it. Etheridge does not. Yeah. Mr. Moreno, ha ha ha. Yeah, I see. James, I would be curious, since you're on here, where did you land? You landed on its inclusion, but with the plural pronoun on the end. So however, it seemed good to Silas to remain with them. That's where you went, right? We'll give you a few seconds to catch up there because I think I'm behind. I'm behind here. Yeah. All right. So that's it for that. I could mention a little bit more about the debate, but I don't really want to. I went over that for about an hour yesterday. So if when we're done here, go take a look at that. I think that video is still going fairly strong, actually. Apparently, a lot of people are really interested in my review of the debate, which is kind of cool. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. It's good. Now, the other thing to kind of talk a little bit about is direction for the channel. I've been thinking a little bit about what my channel is for, what it's about, why am I here? Inclusion, but with Oftos at the end. See the slide? Yes. Yeah, so what am I focused on here? So generally speaking, I focus a lot on the textual questions. Let me just switch here. There we go. I can talk to you instead of you talking to a screen. So I'll look to continue that. I don't think there's many more of these verses that are contained in the KJV, but not in the Byzantine text or the Textus Receptus, sorry, and where those go from a Byzantine text perspective. I think I got 3 or 4 left. Yeah, three or 4 verses left. And then after that, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. I have this list of papyrus manuscripts, and I've been slowly tabulating which verses are included in which manuscript, because ultimately what I want to do is take this kind of list of information, put that in a proper database, and then query it to ask certain questions like how many papyrus manuscripts attest to Luke 24:1, and you can type it in and get the results like right away and say, oh, there's like 3 and it's P75 and P68 or whatever, right? The other questions that I want to answer is how many papyrus do we have before the 3rd century, before the 4th century, before the 5th century, to divide them up by that way, and then divide up how the New Testament is divided amongst papyrus in certain centuries. Because what I want to do is the burning question is, right, is do the papyrus represent a text type let me rephrase that. Do the papyrus represent texts from all over the Mediterranean world? Is there a good representation there? Now, I'm inclined to say no. There's a number of reasons for that, right? One is because the Western manuscripts, for example, what we see in the Latin texts, seems markedly different than what we're finding amongst the papyrus. The other thing, too, is there are a number of Byzantine readings in some of the papyrus manuscripts. There's a few odd papyrus manuscripts with interesting things going on. And so if we can tabulate and determine what verses are where, we can get an idea of how much of the New Testament is attested to in the papyrus. And then we can answer questions like, well, is there enough attestation to the New Testament in the papyrus that we can gain an understanding of a text type? For example, if you come to a book of the New Testament that only has 2 manuscripts in the papyrus, that's not going to be enough to establish any sort of text type or any sort of relationship. So yeah, that's the question. Those are the questions I want to answer. So that's kind of what I was thinking about doing after we're done with these 16 or so verses. 16 or so. The other one is I wanted to take a look at a couple other textual variants which involve kind of like half verses. One that is specifically that I'm thinking of is Romans 8:1, right? There is now therefore no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. And then our Byzantine tradition has that walk not in the flesh, but after the Spirit. Now, again, I understand a few verses down, we have the phrase, but is the phrase duplicated? And there seems to be an interesting exegetical work that you can do there if that passage is at verse 1 and verse 4, right? Because the duplications brings up some importance, and that no condemnation is resting not just in the fact that you are a Christian, but that you walk after this. And anyway, there's some interesting things that I want to look at with that. And then, of course, there's John 1:18, is that the only begotten God versus the only begotten Son would be another interesting thing to look at. So yeah, interesting things, kind of a direction where I want to go, and sort of as I'm starting to look into these textual variants too, another thing is kind of coming to my mind, and that is that there's a number of people out there, and of course the channel will always be available to those who are interested in seeing how these variants work through, and some cool stuff in the New Testament text. I'll still be doing interviews and stuff like that. But I think I'm going to be a little bit more purposeful in the direction of sharing these things, one, from a Byzantine perspective, which is what I've been doing, but two, to kind of target people who are not happy, who see issues with the critical text, right, with the methodology produced in that, and then those who are not entirely comfortable with going to a TR base either. So I think the content that I have here speaks specifically to that group. Now, I know there's some majority text guys, and I think it's important to recognize that Byzantine priority is not necessarily the same as Byzantine, or the same as majority. So majority and Byzantine priority are two slightly different things. So majority is specific nose counting, right, which would almost invariably be a Byzantine type text, but Byzantine priority is more about getting back to, well, Byzantine priority means early, right? So that we believe that the Byzantine text references something that comes far earlier. So anyway, just kind of stuff I've been thinking about, and yeah, I don't know. There's going to be some good stuff in the future. So yeah, let's see. Mr. Moreno says, hypothesis: the Western version of Acts was Luke's rambling first draft. His buddy started, Saint Concise told him to cut it down a bit, but someone accidentally grabbed the wordy one from the Latin translation. Nice. Dwayne Green, you almost have 4K. I do. I almost have 4,000 subscribers. It's a very exciting time. I probably won't do anything big until I hit 5,000. 5,000 will be the number. But yes, it's exciting. But it seemed good to Silas that they should stay, is how I think Acts 14:34 should read. Now, I'd be curious how that works with the plural form of avtus. My Greek's kind of rusty. I don't recall seeing a pronoun used in the same way as place. And which is interesting, because when you look at the variant readings on here, avtothi is a variant instead of avtos, which means there, specific, like explicitly there, as in there in that place. I would have thought that the fact that avtos is plural there, avtus, would have referred back to the individuals rather than to the place that he's in. Anyway, yeah, I guess I don't know. I'll have to really dive into that one. All right. Well, today's a quicker live stream, so thanks for everybody for popping in. This was a very interesting one. And, oh, hey, here we go. We got a question. I almost got out. Dwayne, have you read any early Christian works? I have. I am going to be diving again, though, into Irenaeus's Against Heresies. I've got to jump in there, because there's lots of really interesting stuff in there. I've gone through some of the Apocrypha, Book of Enoch, interesting read. I've gone through a lot of stuff in the Christian Loeb Library. Mostly, I haven't actually sat down and read through one cover to cover from there. But yeah, I've been familiar with some of that stuff. I've gone through some of Chrysostom's homilies, like we went through today, a little bit more earlier. But yeah. So yeah, I do take a look at some of the early Christian works, and somewhere that I'd love to dive into a little further. So Against Heresies, that's kind of the next one. And again, I do plan on learning Latin at some point. That's going to get into my head, and that'll open up a few doors too. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for popping into the live stream, and brothers and sisters,